Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. I'm Marsha Davis. Again, thanks for joining us on our Bold People Magic Dreams webinar series. I'm the executive director of the Zedek Social Justice Fund, where we redistribute money, resources, and power to support systems change and community healing in Asheville, North Carolina. And through adaptive, trust-based philanthropy, we resist oppressive systems and work to transform our collective home into a place where everyone flourishes. And for some of you who have joined us for all of these webinars, you already know this background information, but for some of you who are new to us, in 2018, we engaged in something we called a pause for the cause, where we paused our flagship program, still engaged in organizational grant making, but we launched into an internal analysis building process and a community research process that surfaced gems of information for us and insights that we felt would be useful for other funders, nonprofit leaders, and other local stakeholders. And so we are not keeping this treasure to ourselves. We've been unveiling this information over the course of multiple webinars. This one is our third one, where we're talking about sustaining impacted leadership. And if you're interested in what was shared in the first two webinars, we've got the videos posted up on our website. And the fourth webinar, our last one in the series, is coming up next Tuesday. You can also register on our website to get access to that webinar. But let's launch into the concept of sustaining impacted leadership. One of the guiding questions for us in the community research process, at least when we thought about how do we support the community leadership of social justice leaders who are both impacted, both doing change in their community, but also impacted by the impression that they're seeking to solve. How do we ensure that they actually can continue on in this work? And one of the questions we asked in our community research process to unearth that information was, what would help you sustain your emotional, spiritual, physical, and mental health long-term as you work for justice? And I'll share, the key themes, but there were a couple of quotes that emerged in their research that really seem to encapsulate a lot of what these themes are and what folks wanted to share about their experience. So I wanted to share some of these quotes with you today. Here's the first one. I think for the most part, people who step into this work step into it because it is their life's work. A lot of us don't have traditional 9 to 5 hours. We're working around the clock and our phones are never off. We may put email responders on, but that doesn't mean we are not doing the work. It's hard sometimes to actually prioritize mental health and physical health because you just want to keep going. One of the stories that emerged from our research, and let's partner that with this other quote. They specifically said that one of the ways that we could support them was to support impacted leadership was to make sure that my personal needs are being met so that I can show up and be a superstar, or I can show up and be in the best light that I can be. What usually happens is we are showing up to be a light for everyone else, but our personal affairs are in shambles. These quotes really highlighted and allowed to land for me what the circumstances are for a lot of the folks in our community who are fighting for social justice, fighting to make sure that our community is a place where everyone can thrive, and yet are still not having their basic needs met because they're putting the needs of the community before themselves. And here they are doing work that allows, and I will say because I'm based in Asheville as well, here they are doing work that allows me to have a better life, and yet missing some of the support through traditional funding means. They're usually not getting the support that they need to make the work sustainable in the long term. And here were some of the things that they identified as being the items that they really needed to sustain their leadership. The responses, as you can imagine, were varied, right? We grouped them, though, into 4 categories: organizational support, cultural support, interpersonal support, and financial support. Now, in the organizational support category, what the leaders named that they really needed, both from funders, but also from other nonprofit leaders, from those of us in community who are supporting their work, what they really needed was support for collaborative leadership models, allowing them to go into these alternative leadership models that we know are amazing for building grassroots democratic power, and yet you're not always getting the funding support to make that work. right? From a salary perspective. They wanted administrative and general operational support. Now that's been a theme throughout all of these webinars. Everyone who responds to every question keeps saying, please give us general operational support. Supporting salaries and supporting benefits is as important as supporting that direct service. So give them the flexibility to use the funds the way that they need. Other ways of organizational support: time and space for staff training, human-centered expectations to prevent overwork, provide technical assistance, web development, storytelling, communications and promotion support, access to skill building and credentialing opportunities. So if folks are entering into this work from a grassroots perspective, give them the support and the resources that they need to kind of skill up and level up. Now, the cultural support they asked for is please honor wide-ranging pathways for self-care, value risk-taking and learning, prioritize voices across the generational spectrum, give us time for rest and reflection, help us and support us in implementing values that are that counteract the prevailing culture of white supremacy, specifically urgency, perfectionism, power hoarding, defensiveness. Trauma-informed policies and practices. Give them opportunities to unravel internalized oppression and superiority, and give folks support in shifting narratives that perpetuate inequities. Now, in terms of interpersonal support, they ask for role modeling from mentors and elders, honest feedback, peer relationships grounded in learning, accountability, and love, political education across identities. And in terms of financial support, asked for support with tuition, sabbaticals, healthcare, childcare, livable, thrivable wages, coaching. As you can hear, there's a wide range of things that people need. And so for us as funders, we clearly zoned in on financial support, right? I mean, that is what we're here for. And so of course, that was the category where we looked in a little bit more deeply. And it was interesting, as we saw these results emerge, internally, there were all these conversations. Should there be a sabbatical program? Should there be a skill building program where we send folks to trainings? What should we be doing with financial support for impacted leaders? And we decided to lean into our values. While we really consider individual sabbatical programs powerful, we also know that as an organization, we value trust-based philanthropy. And if we're leaning into trust, it's really important to let individuals know, to trust that the individuals who are impacted know what they need. So we developed two series of grant opportunities where we're providing grants, no strings attached, to individual leaders, in part so that they can use the funds in the way that really makes sense for them. It really doesn't matter, or really isn't in the leader's best interest for us to be making those decisions for them. For one person, a sabbatical is what they need. For someone else, a tuition is what they need. For someone else, skill building is what they need. So why limit them? So we actually designed two grant-making programs. One is the Zedek Impact Awards and the Zedek Brilliance Awards. And they both have the same core theme, but what really makes them different is the amount. So the Zedek Impact Awards provide $3,000 for social justice leaders in recognition of their past achievement in making social change or engaging in community healing in our focal areas: racial justice, LGBTQ plus justice, and combating anti-Semitism. The Brilliance Awards offer a $50,000 no string attached grant to individuals doing similar work. And again, that grant is offered in recognition of people's past achievement. These are social justice leaders who've already made some impact in Asheville and are receiving these funds as these no string attached grants. The limitations or the criteria also is that you must be an impacted leader, meaning that you're working to address some form of inequity that you are also impacted by. And we're also, because we're a place-based fund, the other criteria that we put into receiving these grants is that you must live within 30 miles of Asheville City Hall. Now, that may take you a little bit outside of Asheville City, but the reason that we designed the grants in these ways is we know that Asheville is a rapidly gentrifying city, and most of the folks who are here doing social justice work actually can't afford to live in town. So we had to broaden the boundaries of this award if we wanted to make sure that folks who were doing work in town are really eligible. And the Brilliance Awards, uh, folks can either nominate themselves for those awards, or members of community can nominate them as well. And we make decisions on those Brilliance Awards in a participatory process. So for the Brilliance Awards in particular, it was important that it wasn't just Zedek staff making the decision, that there were other members of our Asheville social justice community whose voices were being put into the process of having to determine who should get these awards, um, and and choosing among the many very many people who were self-nominated for the process. We keep the evaluation committee anonymous just so that they have the ability to make the decisions that they need to make without feeling that they are being pulled by external forces and external biases. Now, both of these programs were launched in 2019, and I'm excited to name some of the impacts that we've had to date. So as of today, April 21st, 2022, we've given out 136 impact awards, which is over $406,000 given to individual community leaders. And then we've also given out 4 of the larger Brilliance Awards. So that's $500,000 that's been given out, again, to community leaders. And while I know we as funders love to look at the dollars and like to look at the numbers served, I actually think that the pieces of data that help me to feel like this program is deeply impactful in community is actually more of the qualitative data that we collected about what the experience is of these Impact Award winners and these Brilliance Awards winners. I want to give a shout out here to consultants from CoThink, who are a local giving circle, and they facilitated a process called ripple effect mapping, where we were able to pull out some really significant qualitative data from responses of those who won the Impact Awards, to hear what their experience was and what actually they felt the impact of these programs were. We also did some pretty extensive interviewing with our past Brilliance Awards winners. We just awarded our last series of Brilliance Awards, and so the 6-month mark hasn't hit for them yet, but they will be involved in that evaluation process as well when the time comes. And here are the themes that emerged in terms of what people did with the money and what they felt like the impact was. And you'll notice as I name what they did with the money, a lot of them are the things that leaders said they wanted us to be able to fund for them. So folks just funded the continuation of their work, engaged in either expansion of their work, or found ways to just keep the work moving and meet more people. What we've really noticed, both with the Brilliance Awards and the Impact Awards, is if you trust people who are already doing social justice work in your community with funds, they will just continue being who they've always been. They will continue engaging in the work where they've been impacting your communities. You get such a deep return on your investment that way. A large majority invested in tuition or some kind of training for themselves. And some even engaged in paying for trainings for others, starting, one of our Impact Award winners started Clinicians of Color movement to help support folks who are re-entering society from prison. We've had quite a few people who took sabbaticals, took some time for rest and self-care. And it's this impact, the ability for folks to have a little bit of respite, that helps us to consider the Impact Awards and the Brilliance Awards as part of a healing justice strategy as well, allowing folks who have typically been left out of some of the self-care opportunities that emerge in our society, and allowing them to have the space to heal in the ways that they need to. A lot of folks invested in financial wellness. They paid off debt, they added to down payments. So not only investing in financial wellness, but building generational wealth, right? They also really engaged in mutual aid. So many of the stories, both from our Impact winners and our award winners and our Brilliance Award winners, didn't matter how much money they were given. Most people reported back that they actually shared a lot of the money with other people in their community who might not have access to funds in this way. They engaged in mental wellness, bringing in therapists or non-Western forms of emotional support and mental support. And one of the big themes that emerged that our team feels incredibly proud of, because it allows us to really uplift specific people in community, is folks said time and time again that part of the impact of this award was just the sheer recognition of their work, that someone finally could see what they were doing in community and deemed it to be worthy of some type of recognition. I'm thinking specifically in our last class of award winners, Miss Hanan, who provides meals. And pretty much anytime there's a community event, she's ready and willing to show up to support, to provide the radical hospitality needed to keep the event moving. And she's been doing that for years without recognition. We just honored her in our last class of Impact Award winners. And that sheer recognition not just amplifies her and helps her to feel more confident in her work, but also gives other people in the community the opportunity to amplify her as well, and to feel inspired by the fact that someone else who's doing work similar to them has gotten recognized, has allowed them to also have the courageousness to start applying for other funding opportunities as well. And here's one of the other important theme that we heard time and time again, that these awards provided the flexibility to support human needs. So fixing a car, buying a house, time to rest, seeking new relationships, maybe getting an assistant to help you with your work. And all of those things, the supporting of human needs, provides space for rest. Most of the times, the folks who are doing this community work are not getting the space to rest, even in the very mundane way of getting to have a couple of days off work. Most of the folks that we are funding have very little days off because they're working their 9 to 5. And in addition to their 9 to 5, they're going into community, showing up at every community meeting, advocating for racial equity, advocating for LGBTQ plus equity, advocating for combating anti-Semitism, and doing that in a way that almost seems that's tireless. And yet they're doing it over and over again because they understand the importance of doing that work to their community. These awards allow people to have the space for respite, for care, but most importantly, to have their specific individual needs met. Most times, when conventional funders give funds to organizations hoping that they will fund self-care, hoping that they will fund some of these types of work, what we've often found is people are so passionate about their social justice work that very rarely will they take those funds and put it towards themselves. They will often take those funds and continue to put it towards the work. So then you'll ask, hey, how was the day off or the retreat? And they'll say, well, no, there was an urgent need in my community, so I didn't take that money for myself. So part of the reason we really value giving money directly to individuals in a way that is no strings attached is that it really encourages them to use the money on themselves, which is actually, you'll find, very, very hard to get a community leader or social justice worker to do, right? So let's talk, though, a little bit about adaptive trust-based philanthropy and how that has shown up in the process of us doing these awards. We're sharing details from our community research report, but it's important to know that listening to feedback is not a static process. We are continually collecting feedback from our grantee partners, our trusted advisors, and our board members. The journey to being in right relationship with the communities we fund is actually a spiral, not linear, right? So you listen to feedback, you try something out, you get more feedback, and you continue to improve and iterate and make changes. So we wanted to share a story of adaptive philanthropy in action. When we first launched the Brilliance Awards in 2019, they were $100,000 a year for 2 years. And we wanted to fund this audacious, ambitious amount, in part to inspire transformation among our funding community. But really, we did a calculation. We thought, with the Brilliance Awards in particular, what do we want people to be able to do? So the grants are no strings attached, but we wanted to craft them at an amount that would allow someone to have kind of an executive full-time salary. So that would be about $70K for the budget in Asheville. plus about $30K to fund any project work that they wanted to do. Again, the grants are no strings attached. Someone could decide that that's not what they wanted to do with the money, but we wanted to make it at the size where someone, if they wanted to take a year off work, could do so. We also wanted to give it for 2 years so that someone had 1 year off work, and then the second year could start to think through how they wanted to change their financial situation to make this sustainable for them in the long run. Now, here's what was really interesting for us. Brilliance Award feedback. Now, it was overwhelmingly positive, both from winners and those who weren't selected. Folks were saying, wow, this is great that you're honoring us. This is great that you're finally seeing this work. And it's great that you're giving money. Thank you for listening to us when we say give us money in the community feedback process. And here's the thing. When we listened to key stakeholders, we also heard some important pieces of constructive feedback. One of the pieces of constructive feedback was the grassroots leaders were saying, we have been pushing so hard to move people towards collective action, to move away from the concept of charismatic individual leaders being the sources of change. And here you are crafting an award that may be seen as awarding charismatic leaders. Well, why would we do that if you knew that what actually causes system change is collective power building? Now, here's the thing. We do completely at Zedek honor collective power building. And we were stuck in this moment, though, with getting this piece of feedback where we had to say to ourselves, how do you figure out which feedback to listen to? If you're listening to your community and your community is asking for multiple things. So we had one segment of our community saying, yes, give us money directly to us. And we had one segment of our community saying, hold on, shouldn't we be funding collectives? And all of these folks were people that we deeply trusted and admired. How do we balance all of that? I'll tell you how we did in a second, but I wanted to also name another piece of important constructive feedback that we heard was, are you seeing competition here? If you have a process that's really awarding individual leaders, doesn't that by nature pit one community leader against each other? Is it helpful to our communities of social justice leaders to be breeding competition in this way? And again, that's a very real and honest piece of feedback. So what did we do when we heard those pieces of feedback? Well, I'll say the first piece of advice is to get over your preciousness about the program that you designed, right? As much as we like to say that the babies that we create are completely beautiful, once you start to engage in relationship with community, you have to recognize that your relationship with community is going to be a little bit more important than your sense of ownership or ego over this baby that you created. You've got to let it go, right? And the other piece that we started thinking about were our values, right? Is you have to think through when feedback comes in from your community, where does it overlap with the values of your organization, your staff skill, and your organizational capacity? It would be amazing to be able to tell people that every piece of feedback you receive from community you can enact, but we can't. And especially for us, like a small fund, we've got 3 full-time people and 2 part-time people doing the best we can with that amount of folks. So what do we do? In this particular situation, when we were thinking about the Brilliance Awards, the piece that became the most important to us actually were our values. Looking at both our values and what we believe about how change occurs, and what we also believe about what the reality of organizing is. So our values are definitely that the most powerful systems change work occurs in collectives, right? And so we did reduce the amount of the Brilliance Awards from $100,000 a year for 2 years to $50,000 as a one no strings attached grant. And we reduced that and gave the rest of the money that used to be allocated to the Brilliance Awards to other grants to organizations that redistribute land and money to the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities of our area. We had to acknowledge that our trusted advisors actually had a valid point. Collective power is important around systems change. What we also realized as well, and this is what led us to take a both and approach, why we are funding both collectives, which we've always done, and then continuing to fund individuals. Because there's a reality of organizing. Many of the grassroots leaders who do this work, like I said before, will put money into the work, but also don't have the opportunity to put money into themselves. And so most grassroots leaders are stuck in a position of not having housing stability, no retirement, no healthcare. And so people that we have been applauding for being able to build justice in our communities often find themselves at the end of their lives without the resources that they need to keep things going, right? So we've seen over and over and over again, people who show up at every community meeting, actually make the change happen, are these powerful catalysts in their community, and then something an emergent issue arises in their lives, and now they have to do a GoFundMe to get their basic needs met. And so, as much as we would like to believe that our world is at a point where collective action is the only thing that's needed to keep things moving, we have to meet people with where they are in the reality of organizing, and realizing that many of us, with the funding structures we currently have, we're making martyrs of the people who are our community leaders. And that doesn't feel like being in right relationship with our community leaders either. The other piece for us is we wanted to engage in some narrative change. Keeping the Brilliance Awards large and a transformative amount allows us to start seeding the concept of abundance in our community. We believe that there are enough funds in this town and in this country to ensure that those community leaders who make Asheville a place where we all can thrive, that they can thrive as well. And we want to seed transformational experiences to inspire other funders to add to this work. I'll speak specifically to Asheville. We know that Asheville is a town where it's essentially a retirement town, where many people of wealth come to spend the wonderful days of their lives in the mountains near the Biltmore Estate and enjoying all of this community has to offer. And part of what they're enjoying is the equity and the progressive nature of the town that's been built by community leaders who are often not paid well. And we believe that there's, again, enough funds here for us to make sure that everyone can thrive. So what we'd like to, while we realize that having individuals apply for award may feel in some ways competitive, in the sense that while they know that they deserve the award, they also know that there are at least 20 others who deserve it as well. And what we're hoping to do is start seeding an abundant nature in our town, so that folks who do have wealth will see how many amazing people there are in our town and start to decide for themselves that they would like to engage in the same sort of work. So instead of reducing how much money each person gets, we're trying to inspire a cultural shift around our concepts of money and who's worthy of the money and who's not. Right? So that's enough of hearing from me. What I'm really excited about is that you'll get the opportunity to hear from some of our Brilliance Award winners. And on that, I'll pass it off to Libby to introduce them and start our conversation.
All right. Thank you, Marsha. And thank you all for being here with us today. We're so excited to be before you again. So I'm going to introduce our 4 panelists for today. And I'm going to start with Shanika Smith. Shanika Smith founded Date My City, a social organization that sought to enhance the cultural identity of Black Asheville by fostering social cohesion, increasing civic participation, and centralizing Black leadership. Sheneika currently serves as Vice Mayor of Asheville City Council. She has also served on the board of the Center for Participatory Change and was in the founding cohort of Co-Think, which is a giving circle. Nicole Townsend-Green. Nicole is a former regional organizer at Southerners on New Ground, SONG, where she co-led Black Mama's Bailout, as well as supported the leadership of queer and transgender folk in Buncombe County and across the South. Nicole has spent the last several years supporting nonprofit organizations and academic institutions with equity training and strategic equity planning. She is currently a member of Southerners on New Ground and Co-Think, a senior affiliate trainer for Race Forward, and serves as the finance and operations strategist for Blueprint North Carolina. Marta Alcala-Williams. Matalicia has worked for over 30 years in Asheville to create a culture of equity, racial justice, and collective liberation. As Executive Director of Equity and Community Engagement for Asheville City Schools, Williams engages principals, teachers, and parents to adopt asset and justice-based thinking and practices. She partnered with Black mothers in Hillcrest to start Mother Read, which brings diverse books to life through rich discussion about racial equity and collective liberation. And she co-founded Marvelous Math Club in partnership with UNCA's Dr. Sam Kaplan, which centers the gifts of each student leader. Each student leader, parents, and guardians in the Pisgah View community. As a leader of the Racial Equity Institute, REI, Asheville Core Team, Marta has a deep commitment to bringing life-changing racial equity workshops to hundreds throughout Western North Carolina. She also volunteers with the Keep It Moving Coalition, leading conversations about racial equity for residents who have participated in REI and building bridges. Last but certainly not least is Miss Renee White. Miss Renee is an Asheville native. She has served as the East End Valley Street Neighborhood Association president for 10 years. Ms. White has led neighborhood advocacy for community investments and public policy changes for the historically African American neighborhood, deeply impacted by the community destruction caused by urban renewal. White is one of the key organizers of the annual East End Valley Street Community Heritage Festival. She has spearheaded neighborhood cleanups and beautification, neighborhood food distribution, and even community COVID testing. Ms. Renee serves as the Vice President of the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust and on the board of the Rosa Walker Advancement Initiative. She was an active participant in the Isaac Coleman Economic Community Grants process, the development of the Buncombe County's Racial Equity Action Plan, and the E.W. Pearson Project Collaborative, which has led to the creation of Buncombe County's Legacy Neighborhood Program. All right, thank you all for being here with us today. So excited to see your faces. Before I do a deep dive into questions, I want to give you each just an opportunity to say whatever might be on your mind or your heart at this moment. Let's start with Nicole.
Hey y'all. I'm just excited for the conversation. I think that I'm hoping that what is said makes a few folks uncomfortable, and that folks take these reflections and thoughts back and make some transformations happen.
Thank you, Nicole.
I'll go next. I would just like to say that it is an honor and a privilege to be on this platform today with such great community leaders, people who have caused such great impact in our community. And I'm certainly appreciative of my Brilliance Award. And thank you for that recognition. And I'm hoping that in this conversation, as Nicole said, some good, impactful things can come out of it, action plans, and you'll get to hear our, our versions of what we do, the community work, and the impact that we felt that is in our lives and in our communities.
Thank you, Ms. Renee. Marta, Sheneika.
Go ahead, Sheneika.
Okay, I'll go. I'm glad to be here. I was a part of Co-Think in one of his Genesis programs, I would say, the cohort, the social justice cohort. And I'm glad that Co-Think, well, not Co-Think, I'm sorry. I'm glad that Zedek is taking this dive and getting into the hardness of leading and funding. A lot of funders play a position where they safeguard their original ideas, and they're not in the good, bad, and ugly that a lot of leaders go through in transformation. So I'm glad to be a part of its evolution, and also to be a recipient, and to also prepare other leaders to apply for grants.
Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I am so, like Mrs. Renee, humbled and honored to be here with all of you and to be sharing space with you and to speak about all of our experiences, to speak truth. I don't even know if we want to say uncomfortable, because anybody that is on here, if you know me, you know you have already been uncomfortable at some point in your life speaking with me, and how necessary it is, right, in order to transform and to change lives and to impact things in a way where we all actually want collective liberation. So hopefully with everything that you will hear from each and every one of us, you will know that it takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of bravery. It takes this word that I'm trying to remove from my vocabulary starting right now, resilience. I don't want it anymore. I don't want to be resilient anymore. I want freedom. I want to rest. I want to relax. I want to have some time where you can just woosah. And so I'm just really grateful to be here with all of you.
Thank you. And we're really grateful to have you all here. And a little bit later, we'll hear about that word freedom again. So those of you that are in the audience, I also want you to know that we welcome your participation via the chat, and we'll keep an eye on the chat and try to bring in some of the things that you say as often as we can. And we'll also have a period at the end where you can do some question and answers. So let's go ahead and dive in. My first question to the panelists, why is it important to support community leaders?
I'll start. It's important to support community leaders because of, number one, the nature of the work that we do, the amount of the work that we do, the time that it requires, and our mental stability and our mental health, physical health. A lot of times, I personally work a full-time job and also do just as much work community as I do on a full-time job. So for me, that's a lot in one person's life. In the course of a day, the entire day is taken and done. I mean, by the time I wake up in the morning and go to bed at night, full day. Because generally, if I work a 9 to 5, I've got a meeting after meeting after meeting after work, which normally lasts to 8, maybe 9 o'clock at night. So it's important that we're supported because we need the assistance, we need the community, we need everything within the realms of our lives that is supportive to us so that we can try to remain somewhat stable, somewhat healthy, and be able to continue the work that we do. Not only that, from a financial standpoint, most of the times we're stressing also about maybe bills, it may be medical bills, school, etc. And there's not enough money to maybe housing. There's not enough money most of the time to support those issues that we may have, which causes additional stress and additional heartaches and headaches for us on top of the work that we're trying to get done and help our communities. So often we have to I have to pat my own self on the back and say, Renee, keep pushing, keep going, you can do it. Because there are days when you just wonder, am I going to be able to do it? But I also have to realize that at the end of the day, that if Renee clock out, the world is not going to stop turning. So it becomes at that point that I have to just say to myself, Renee, take a break, breathe. You have to do you at some point to make this happen. So I think it's important that we're getting support from all areas in our lives and from the community, from funders, from everybody and people that we're trying to impact to keep us going.
And I just want to highlight a couple of things that I heard Miss Renee say before we move on to the next panelist. But one of the things that's very striking is that she works as many hours supporting community as she does on the job that pays her. And Miss Renee, if I'm making an assumption, please correct me, but doesn't pay her enough to be able to live comfortably in Asheville.
Exactly.
So that right there that's huge. So you're working a full-time job and you're a full-time community worker for free.
Yeah, because there have been times when I've said I need to get a part-time job, but I don't forfeit that because I want to help my community. There's so many things that need to be done that I don't get paid for until I make it work, try to make it work with just my regular income. I mean, I could use a part-time job, but I can't be at a meeting at 5 o'clock if I have to go to a part-time job, or if I have another job that I have to go to. And it's more important to me, coming from my heart, that I'm able to assist my community and the people that's being at a disadvantage. And I have a homeless pantry. I want to make sure that it's stopped for people to get free food. And it's just that I sacrifice that part of it to do the community work.
Thank you so much, Miss Renee.
I'll hop in. I want to uplift both Fannie Lou Hamer and Rosa Parks. Fannie Lou Hamer died in her 50s because of the stress of this work. And Rosa Parks, when she passed away not having the financial resources to sustain herself, right? And so these are people who sacrificed their whole lives for us and did not have the resources to take care of themselves. And I think it's important to understand that most folks doing community work, especially Black and Brown women, are sacrificing their bodies, their mental health, and even when Black and Brown mothers who spend more time with community members than their children because they care so much about creating a stronger world for their children, right? And so there's a lot of sacrifices that go into this work that folks are willing to make, and also naming that a lot of leaders that folks praise are not able to take care of themselves, and most likely won't even name that, right? There are a lot of folks that are, unless you are in deep relationship with, you don't know that they're about to get evicted from their apartment, right? You don't know that their car isn't able to be fixed because they don't have the resources, but they're still able to show up in community. And so when we're thinking about pouring into people, I think it's important to name that. I mean, in Asheville alone, most folks really cannot have a decent quality of life there because it's expensive to live. And so this is beyond like, hi, I want to recognize people, you're doing a great job. It's also like, how do we make sure people can live? Even thinking of healthcare, right? Making sure folks can get a therapist, right? That looks like them, and can just, take care of their health. So I think investment in leaders just goes beyond, we're thankful for what you do, and also like, we want you to survive, we want you to live, we want you to be here when you're in your 80s, right? And not have to leave early because the stress of this work.
Nicole said something that really sparked something in me, because I grew up a preacher's daughter, and my mom was also a community worker. So the passion that they put into the passion and time and money they put into the community caused a deficit in them really seeding into my sisters and I, our developmental health, our mental health, investing in our dreams. So the Brilliance Award for me allowed me the freedom, the time, the interest to really seed into my daughters and to spend time with them and really love on them, pour into them, identify who they are, identify their gifts, actually pay for services for them to groom themselves as individual ladies and come up with these brilliant ideas. So seeding into leaders sometimes has the ripple effect of holding families together, holding relationships together, because we are able to show up 100% ourselves, 100% mother, sister, auntie, praise and worship leader, what have you, and not have the financial burden that sometimes really squelches your true identity, your excellence, your brilliance, the true essence of who you are. So that is one part of it. And another part of it is seeding into leaders. It has the reach that traditional funding does not have. I think traditional funding has its blind spots and it has its limitations, where most community members who need the most pouring into and who need the most love, time, talent, and treasure, they're not going to apply. They're not going to come forth. They don't find themselves worthy. They don't have the verbal confidence and the written skills confidence to come forward. But when you seed into leaders, we have the eyes that you all don't have and the hands that you all don't have to make that reach and pull people up. It's a capacity builder.
Thank you. Woo! Snaps all the way around. Thank you all so much for everything you have said. I'm going to do a twofold here, right? I'm going to say, how about when you do have that full-time job and every day when you walk in, you have to prepare yourself and armor yourself for all of the microaggressions, for all of the things that come at you, for all of the things that you have. Oh, I just want to say all the things that everyone in the panel knows what I'm talking about, because we all live it. And when you enter that building, every day you have to set yourself with whatever protection that is. It's a prayer, it's a block, it's an armor, whatever. And that's where you get your regular paycheck, right? And then when you're doing the other job, the one that Ms. Renee and everyone else on the panel is talking about, that's in community, that's where you can be your authentic self and you pour all of your heart and you do all of the things and you're breaking barriers and you're breaking through things and you're accessing and making the connections that sometimes you don't even know how to do, or if you even know how to make it, but you just somehow make it. And that's the one that you don't get paid for, right? Then you want to be invited to be on every board because we need diversity. You want to be invited to be on all the things because we need people of color. And when we don't know any better, we don't do any better, because I know that I was a victim of that at the beginning when I first arrived to Asheville, right? I was like on 9 boards at one point, y'all, right? And when you don't know anybody, you're like, oh my gosh, they must think I'm so smart. Everybody they want to hear everything I had to say. They want me on everything. Woo, look at me, right? And then after a little while, it's like, I'm never home. I don't have time for anything personal in my life. And you start paying attention, right? And then when I did go to REI, and then I did begin to understand the arrangement, and I did begin to understand tokenism and all of the things at a different level, it was not so beautiful, right? And so to me, that's kind of like, how do we balance the one that we have an obligation for, that we can't do nothing different about, because that is your bread and butter, and that's where you have to get beat up, and all of the things. And then the one where you really feel so connected and so nourished. And then that's the one you have to do for free. So for me, the Brilliance Award, right, it's kind of like, oh, I'll tell you what, I tell all the people that invite me to boards and everything, are you also going to pay for a 90-minute massage? You want me to do a little talk for the 20 minutes, something? That's a 90-minute massage with a pedicure, right? Because I've been doing so many things for free for so long that now, I mean, you see how Libby is laughing because I'm not playing, right? Hey, Marta, can I pick your brain? You may not. You may not pick my brain. You may buy me a massage, a pedicure, a fancy dinner, something, and then we can talk. And don't pick my brain, right? So it's really important for all that are present to understand that when you are living in a body that is not white, you are already impacted every single day when you leave your house, unless you own your own business. And so then to have to, on top of that, do all of the added pieces, how do we take care of ourselves for that? Is there enough, are there enough funds for the massages and the pedicures and the acupuncture and all the things that other people get to do so that they can be well?
And Marta, I'm going to say a little bit about what you just said. I have actually finally learned to say no. I am now picking and choosing my battles, because I too, 9 or 10 boards, 11, 12, 13, But I also realize I'm going to be as effective as I need to be if I'm spread that thin. And so I have learned not gonna do it. uh, and that has given me some sense of relief and some sense of you can't do everything. You can't do it. It's just not possible. And so, like you said, even though I'm like you, oh, they want me on this board, that board, every board. At first, I was excited, like, whoo, they really think a lot of me. Until I realized I'm dragging by 9 o'clock at night. Sometimes get into bed and my sleeps are not even restful. I get up the next morning, I'm still exhausted, and it's on and on and on. So now I'm saying no. I'm just saying no.
And so, what I hear you all saying, several things. Number one, how you have to armor yourself for the job that pays you. And then you spend more time in the community that isn't necessarily able to pay you, but that's where your passion and your desire for your community and supporting your community rests. And so you do it even though you're tired, even though all of these different things are occurring, and realizing at some point, you have to put the onus on yourself and take care of yourself and be willing to say no and be okay with saying no, right? And so, as we think about support for our community leaders, it's also very important for us to recognize that when we talk about supporting community leaders, really what we're talking about is giving back to leaders who pour out themselves, and not just themselves as individuals. They pour out from themselves, from their families, and from their life in general to support and make sure the people that they love and care about and they consider as community and family, that things are happening in a way that is going to create more access for community and build up individuals and collectives within community. Marsha, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is such an interesting. I love that we're having this conversation in public and that y'all are naming these things in public, because one of the dynamics that we don't often name is that community leaders, yes, are invited to be on all of those boards and invited to be on all the panels and invited to be in all the listening sessions, and and we don't expect them to ask for pay. And when I say we, I mean those of us who are in the positions in offices that predominantly work on computers and get to send emails to schedule these panels, right? And but realizing that, like, for those of us who are calling them in from the position as of a funder, from the position of a nonprofit, yeah, nonprofit staff member, we're typically getting paid for that time. We're typically reaching out to people to be on boards as part of our job, our 9 to 5 paid job. That for most of us, we get to go home at the end of the day and say, I did my job because I did community engagement. And look at how I brought all these people from all these marginalized communities into this space. And yet, what does it say? And how can you be in right relationship with folks who you say you're in community with when you expect to get paid for that time, but you're not expecting them to even want to get paid for that time? Or there's some, or sometimes I notice for those of us who are doing this as part of our paid work that we bristle a little bit when someone from community is like, should I get paid? Should I get a pedicure? And you're like, well, I mean, I don't think they're doing this work from the depth of their heart. And yet, is that really a fair thing to ask when most of us are are in salaried positions to ask people who to come into these spaces, right? And so, at the very least, I think I want us to kind of start setting up the conversation as it's not actually a radical thing to pay people for the time that they're investing in a project. It's actually a really basic thing. And so for me, I want us to get really, really curious. If you start to ask yourself, should we be paying community leaders? Is to ask yourself, why do you ask the question about paying community leaders when you're not asking about the question of paying yourself as a staff member, who very many times we don't hold the same lived expertise, right? And so why does it feel more challenging and more radical to give money to someone who's doing work than it does to give money to someone who's doing work but also sits in an office, right? So I just think it's what I'm hearing from the folks on the panel is that this is a moment for us all to get super, super curious about what our culture tells us about who deserves money and who doesn't.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Marsha. All right, panelists, can you share with us what has occurred or come to fruition that could never have been without these investments?
I'll start. I have been able to breathe. I have just been able to exhale and say, whew, because it provided me with some sense of security that when I'm looking at, I'd like to retire soon, or in the fact that I was able to put something up for that, in the fact that um, I've been able to pay off some things as far as my bills. And so it is, and then that allows me more energy, the ability to be less stressful, and to be able to pour out a little bit more into what I'm doing as far as the work is concerned. And I've been able to have I done a sabbatical? No. Do will I take the time to? Maybe, I don't know, but it want to at least have the opportunity with having received this Brilliance Award to be able to do that. Therefore, with that, I'm able to pour out more into the community, do more work, and actually get more things done. So I think that that brought a lot of things to the forefront for me. And it's funny because anytime, and as a leader, I feel that if you're not training somebody to take over your position as a leader, that you're not an effective leader. So therefore, I've been able to get some younger girls, pull them along the way with me, and give them a stipend because I don't expect them to do this for anything. And it's funny that I'll do it for anything, but I don't expect anybody else to. And so I always try to make it of showing some type of reward financially to our youth and to our adults through the Rosa Walk initiative that we have that I'm a part of. I'm on the board. I always make sure that I'm pulling somebody younger than me along the way, and I've been able to give them little stipends to show them how to manage money, the value of their money, and what they can do with their money to help ensure that they'll have a good future. So that's come to fruition for me, having that I received this Brilliance Award.
So I'm telling you, the teacher antenna in me are just going up because this is the moment where I would stop my class and say, audience, you're my class, just in case you didn't get that. Where I would say, did you hear something in what Miss Renee said? I think it might have been something that Marsha mentioned earlier. Anyone want to help me out with that?
Yeah.
And then hopefully one of you would say, she talked about the fact that when you give money to leaders, they very seldom keep it just for themselves, but they sow it right back into community. I just wanted to highlight that.
I'll just say that being a single mother, like the ability to really pour into my children and see things that they need for their betterment and their wellness was something that I could not have done on my own in the past because I've come to the realization that I am legit a single mother. I am doing it on my own. And a lot of things that I expected my co parent to do, it was just waiting. It was a dirty waiting game. But, in the course of receiving this money, I was able to get not only myself therapy, but therapy for my children and braces for my children. My youngest daughter on last year, she there was a lump in her breast. So I had to go and get further studies for that, and things are okay. But the same week, my oldest daughter was diagnosed with scoliosis, and we had to go to the children's hospital for that. Now, not only did I have the finances to help support that, to give me security and confidence and peace of mind, but having the money gave me an added peace of mind because when you don't know how to do it, and then you don't know how you're going to pay for it, you're in shambles. It causes chaos, but I was able to actually have confidence in that moment and feel self-reliant and self-sufficient in that moment, knowing that no matter what, I know that I have the financial means and prayer and faith to make it through this. And also, I wanted to say that in the same vein, I was able to not only to answer my family's needs, because Nicole and I received the money during the pandemic. you know, people were calling, people were unemployed, people needed help sending their children back to college. People needed help with their mortgage because their unemployment benefits were running out or not enough. And I was able to take those calls and not only give them prayer, but be an answer for them. And that made me feel great that my family members could call and rely on me. And, and I'm not fumble with a response, but I can respond very quickly.
Thank you so much, Sheneika.
Yeah, I think so I made a little list earlier. I'm not going to read this entire list, but I was also thinking about how, like, most leaders I know do pour back into the community when something is received, right? Like, everything is communal. And I was just thinking about how I think sometimes when we give, we're like, oh, it's just a little thing, but realizing that that's actually a big thing for other people, and how thinking of well, I don't know who was on this selection panel. I do know it was a panel of my peers, right? And how they trusted us collectively to hold and steward this money, knowing that it was probably going to go back out to the community. And so I think about, this money went to planting seeds in Black and Brown land cooperatives in North Carolina, right? And so I think about, while my seed may have been small, the impact that's going to have, right? Or already has. And also thinking of mutual aid work, and being able to really have the financial stress off of me a little bit. Something when we were like prepping for this, thinking about folks who come from a poor or like working class background, who get a good job. People assume like, oh, they're great, they got this and they got that. But what that actually means is now you're the one who is giving more to your family, right? People are calling you and they're like, hey, we need this or we need that. And to be able to say, oh, I can like give without fully depleting myself feels really good. Something that I'm thinking about a lot is one of my cousins is able to open up a restaurant, right? And to be able to support her with some of her all the documentation, or like the documents or fees that you have with your startup, registration, all of that, is like building generational wealth, like in my family, right? And so thinking about that, and then I was able to pay for college, right? One of my barriers was paying for that. And through this, I realized, I'm like, wow, this was 2019 when we first got awarded. And since then, I've been able to get my associates, and now I'm working on my bachelor's at Winston-Salem State. I know there's some shout out to the Rams. And also bought a home, was able to use some of this money for a down payment. And so, and this home is not just my home, right? We've been able to provide shelter and a safe space for queer young people too. So I just think about how, like, on the surface, it's like, here's just a check, but the material conditions that can shift when we trust people in our communities to steward money is important. And I just know that like everyone collectively on this call, like the seeds that we've planted are going to go so far. Yeah. So I just say, trust people, invest in people, and know that our seeds, or your seeds, right? Folks on this call are probably going to go much further than anything you could have thought of.
Whew, thank you, Nicole. So I will say, a theme that we heard from every panelist, right, is how Black and Brown people's money does not always move forward. It has to go forward and sideways and backwards, and to the cousin and to the daddy and to the grandpa that is not feeling well, or da da da. My mother passed away last year and she didn't leave any money, like a lot of people, they're like, oh, my mom passed and left me this inheritance, right? And before I got the award, we also still know that whether we have a little bit or we have medium or we have a lot, that we still have to share it, that there is no option. You still have the cousin that is in jail and the friend who is right? And we're always having to move that money. It doesn't ever get to just build that wealth like many of my friends that don't live in a body that's my color. And I'm very close with many people that I know that that's a true thing. And that's why I know it exists. And then also just to say that I want to recognize that for me, when I hear Shenika saying, as a single mom and a real single mom, right, that has not been the truth for me. I mean, I'm partnered and I did already live in a home, but it's not just my home. And so this now will be an opportunity for me to build wealth that is mine, that is created by me, right? And that what's going to happen with that, right? For my offspring, for my kids, and whether they need it or not, just to know that I was able to start that is like, and that's what I was asking for, right? I didn't know that I was going to get it. Miss Marsha, when you called me and I was like, wait, what? What? Because of sometimes just how I roll and how I am. And so I was really surprised. And again, to hear many on the panel just saying now you can rest or you can breathe or you can relax or whatever, it really does. It's not that you're not going to get that massage and maybe not buy lunch out a couple of times, but instead save it, because we know how to make it happen. That's what we do. We make things happen. But knowing that you can relax a little bit and just be like, oh, I don't have to do it that hard. I don't have to go but I mean, it's almost like that, right? Not the physical sabbatical, but almost like that breath sabbatical where you're kind of like, oh, your shoulders are not up in your ears, and you could just kind of be like, okay, so maybe it isn't just once a month massage. Maybe I could do two, right? Because my body knows that I need it. And hearing all of you, it brings me a lot of joy, but also a lot of sadness in seeing how even an award that is given to us to take care of us, it never can really be just for us, because that's not what we do, because that's not how we move. That's not what we're taught, that it's not ever just for you. That individualism, that thing that is so prevalent in our culture of that individualism and me, and I got it and it's mine and this is how we do it. And I do care about others, but not that much, right? Like I have to take care of me. And so that is just a little taste of practicing of what it feels like to take care of us just a little bit, but knowing that it's not all for us, right? So I just think it's really important. And I hope that everyone that is listening, that you hear this theme of like, the money is never then just for you, meaning us.
And I'm gonna footnote that, Mark, because my thing is this. And it's always been one of my greatest fears. At 70, am I going to be a Walmart greeter? Because I can't fully retire. So he gave me that. I set it up so that I don't want to be a Walmart greeter at 70. I want to be retired. And maybe if I need a Tylenol and not have to go work at Walmart. But yeah, so I mean, but you're right. It's you take a little and you try to make it work the best you can, spread it the best you can, and look after you also.
I love that realism, and Renee, that image really does stand in my head, right? And I think about how few of my relatives I know have actually been able to retire. I don't think I know of anyone in my family who was able to retire and not work until the last day of their life. And I think that's the reality for a lot of us who have like marginalized identities. I think not just Black and brown, but queer and trans. And so this work and what you're saying is so important for all of us to hear. And I also, want to, I hear about the sadness, Marta, and I also want to bring up, like, the data also shows that what you guys are saying is not just limited to you four, that folks in poverty actually give at higher rates than wealthy people. And in terms of, every measure of generosity that there is out there, we give at higher rates. And so it's, one of the things that I have been am awestricken by every time I hear more about what y'all have done and what Impact Award winners have done is the impact of trust-based philanthropy. Because at no point, I mean, there is no grant reporting for this award. It's all based on what you've done in your past. We have absolutely no requirement that they do anything specific with the money. And we definitely have no requirement that they even talk to us again. Right. I mean, the idea is give out the money, but if you want to show up at the panel, great. If you want to show up, like, we'll call you every 6 months because we want to hear how you're doing. We've got some resources to share, but we'd also love to hear your story. But none of this is required reporting. It's for us more relationship building. And one of the things that I find incredibly powerful is you do not have to do reporting to get an impact in community, and that folks are still improving generational wealth. I mean, we've got 4 people building wealth for themselves, which means they are building wealth in Asheville, because that comes back to Asheville and property taxes. I'll tell you all, when you have to pay the tax bill, you're very, very clear that you're not just benefiting yourself with this money, you're also benefiting the city and the state. And so here is an opportunity where we did not have put any requirements on them to use the money in any particular way. And already they have an impact on our community and they have an impact on our city. And it's also important to know that even if they decided to take the money and run and go to another country and never be seen and heard of in Asheville again, that would be well within their right because of the work that they've already done, right? And that these awards are per past achievement. And so, I do want to, like, name their impact, but I think it's also really important to say that we should really be asking ourselves questions about why we expect so much out of folks who've already done so much work. There was some question as we were designing this. People were afraid, like, what do you do if someone takes the money and they move to a different city? We'll celebrate. That's really exciting. And doesn't that tell us something about what's true about Asheville? If the minute someone gets money, they want to leave, right? I mean, all of this is information. But I think it's important for us, if you start to feel yourself, especially as a funder, right? Feeling some tension in your body, some curiosity about, like, oh, but what if you give them the money? What's going to happen? Is I want you to be really, really curious about what that tightness and that contraction is about. And would you be asking those same questions if we had people up here who were degreed in ways that your organization told you was valuable, or were doing work? I think I recently saw someone get a Global Leaders Award, and knowing personally, yet and still, that they're not working as many hours as any of the panelists on this panel are working. So be curious about the contraction. Be curious if you're wondering to yourself, is it actually really safe to give money to community leaders? And if anything, folks have shown over and over again that it's not just safe, but it's deeply impactful.
And Marsha, I'm gonna add to that, and I think I can speak for everybody that's received this on this webinar. Our level of commitment and our level of dedication, and if we had not received a dime, we would still be doing the exact same things that we're doing now. And I want to stress that, because, as I said, I've never really even thought about looking for money for me, but I've always looked at making sure somebody else was going to get compensated or there was something for them. So I just want to say that regardless of the fact if we hadn't received a penny, I think I'm safe to say that we will all be doing the exact same work and more at the same level with the same amount of dedication and the same amount of commitment.
Thank you so much, Ms. Renee. And being cognizant of time, I have one more question that I'm going to ask, and then we'll move into our question and answer period. So, is it fair to redistribute large amounts of resources to the few when there are so many striving for the same vision? That question of fairness.
Libby, I'll be honest. I struggle with that And because I know that in the course of a day, in the course of an hour, in the course of the next few minutes, there's 10 more people that I'm going to see or that I'm working with that is so deserving also. But the other side of it is, well, sure, I'm deserving. I've done the work. I'm still doing the work. And so I'm in a 50-50 situation with that. Because certainly I know that there's so many people that could or should receive it. And I also certainly know that I deserve to receive it. So it's a hard balance for me there. I can't go either way with it. I personally cannot.
Well, I personally would like to just kind of say, as I have my soapbox moment, that yes, of course you deserve it. And yes, of course you do the work 3 times over. And why is there even a question of whether or not it's fair? What I will say about Zedek Social Justice Fund, and one of the reasons I'm so excited. Oh, I just had my year anniversary a couple of weeks ago. Let me put that out there.
Yay.
But one of the reasons I'm so excited to be doing this work with Zedek is because it's not either or, it's both. And what else can we do? So not only are we giving money through the Brilliance Award at larger amounts, but we also give $3,000 awards through our Impact Awards. And how many did you say, Marsha? We've given to how many folks? I think
136?
136.
Or
That's
was
a
it
lot,
160?
right? So that's a lot. So it's not an either or. I think it's a both and.
I want to uplift what Ms. Renee said. I also feel humbled and honored because, right, you're just kind of like, oh, wait, right? And you don't want to say, but why me? Because you're kind of like, oh, it could be me. Yet I also feel like, well, there's so many of us doing the work. And so then what does it look like? I am the one who asked the question about like, are we going to pin each other against each other? Are we going to, what does this feel like? And so to me, I don't know. I don't know exactly what that definition of fair looks like in this particular question. I just know that there are many that are deserving. And so I would like to say to the people on the panel, right? Like, where are all of the organizations that are modeling what Zedek is doing? Now, when you've heard from so many of us of what this looks like, and that when you are contributing to important causes or to philanthropy, or how we're moving our community forward, when you hear, right, that for certain demographics, for certain people that have either experienced poverty or experience being pushed to the margins or whatever it is, not being able to build wealth or whatever, where are we being so revolutionary that we can model what Zedek is doing and just be like, wow, we do have a lot of community leaders that are constantly going way and beyond and never get to stop. And like Ms. Renee said, if we stop, it doesn't mean that the world is going to stop. It's just going to look a little different. And sometimes we do think that if we stop, it's going to stop, or at least I do. And I know that every single one of us, because I know all of you, it's like, but maybe it won't keep going the same way. And maybe somebody's going to do it with causing harm. And maybe somebody's going to do it in a white saviorism way. And maybe they're not going to do it the way that feels respectful and intentional, because it's true. Because we know that. Because that's what's been said to us, right? That when other folks come into the community to help, right, without asking what would be beneficial to move a community forward, that's what happens. There's more poverty pimping, there's more perpetuation, there's more oppression, there's more racism. And so the reason why when Ms. Renee and all of us are saying we don't stop is because we also know the dignity and the integrity that comes with when you're doing it for real from your heart, because you are that too.
Mm-hmm.
Or a millisecond away from that, or you were there and you cannot forget where you came from, or at least I cannot. My grandma said, you better never. If you win the Powerball, whatever, and you forget what you came from, that will be the day that I will haunt you. Right. And so we have to know. Yeah. And she would have coming, so I just want to invite all of us to really be thinking when you hear the tiredness, when you hear the exhaustion, and when you hear that, oh, now I can breathe, or I'm able to take my daughter to the hospital and braces and all the things or whatever, that there is so much money in Asheville, y'all. What does it look like so that then we don't even have to use the word fair in the question? Because it wouldn't even be part of the question. That's my invitation.
I love that y'all are naming the pieces that are sticky, because that's what we wanted to highlight with this process too. These are actually conversations we had internally quite a bit and on the board quite a bit, right? Because our desire is not to split up the community and to cause more competition, and still inadvertently those things happen, right? I mean, at some point someone has to say, okay, I'm putting my hat in the ring and I'm naming myself. And where does that bring up competition? And yet, I get so, again, this is another one of those curiosities right around the word fair, because most of the wealth that exists in this country is passed along from one generation to another without anyone asking them who they are and what they've done. It's passed along through family inheritance. Right. And so, I think a lot of times when we have a question about what's fair, we need to broaden out and look at the system that is asking us to compete, or we're not asking us to compete, but that we're asking questions about $500,000 as opposed to the trillions of dollars that get passed along from one generation to the next. And so for us, when we thought about within Zedek, how do we want to deal with this? It was both, we don't want to deal with the issue of competition or reduce harm by reducing the amount of money that people in our community get, because we already know that they've been locked out of these financial opportunities. What we do want to do, however, is start to actually get us all to be thinking on a systems level and turn around to the folks with wealth and say, why aren't you giving more, so that funds like Zedek Social Justice Fund can be more abundant and can lean into abundance, right? And so that the people who are doing this work can lean into abundance. It's important to note that if you're really concerned about the unfair redistribution of wealth, it's not the Brilliance Awards that's the problem, right? It's the general system of capitalism and philanthropy, and how some people are allowed to hoard wealth and then give out their money with a white-knuckled grip that doesn't acknowledge the fact that they received a lot of that money merely by being born into the right family. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times when I'm thinking about fairness, it makes me think it's not the $500,000, guys. It's the trillions. And let's track what's going on with the system and how the system is allowing the trillions to be hoarded.
And there's also an ignoring of the fact that not only did you inherit this wealth, but you inherited this wealth off the backs of systems that have overburdened Black and brown folks and the economically disadvantaged. So
I would say overburdened. I mean, let's be more explicit. Stolen.
Well, yeah,
both in terms of land and but let's name the thing.
I was gonna jump in and be like, it's stolen. It's stolen.
Right. I mean, let's talk about stolen from indigenous folks that's now worth millions now. Land taken away from, I'm thinking about homes in Montford, right? That now will sell for millions, that were taken away from families for pennies. And I'm thinking about redlining and all of those pieces. And so a lot of the wealth that's being redistributed has been extracted unfairly. I think that's the kind way, and maybe stolen. And we have to acknowledge that and speak about the roots of that if we in philanthropy want to be in right relationship with the communities we say we want to fund and work together with.
And Marsha, I want to add also, may I say something real quick, Libby?
Sure.
I want also
I think I saw Nicole unmute herself. Can we hear her first and then come back around to you, Marta?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
I know. I was just earlier, there was I don't remember, something just like triggered this in me of like, I think that for me, the bigger question is like less about like what is fair and more about like, I personally believe the role of every nonprofit and the role of every philanthropist group is to get to the point to where they close their doors. And I know that like really hurts a lot of people when I say that, because we love nonprofits, they make us, they warm our heart when we give our donation in December, because we've gotten those 50 emails, right? for end of year giving. But I really think that our communities have to be asking ourselves, like, what do we need to do to close the doors of every nonprofit and every philanthropist group? And if we can't answer that question, are we doing the right work? And so I think like um, I want us to get to a point to where folks are not having to apply for grants just to live, right? So how can we create these communities? What do we have to do? A lot of that is healing, right? Healing and reconciliation. But I think that's like the bigger question that's going to get us closer to the answer that we actually want, opposed to like these conversations of like who is worthy of this and versus who is worthy of that, and that person hurt my feelings 5 years ago, so we should never honor them as a leader, right? So I think our question is like, how do we close the doors of all of these organizations, so that people can just have their needs met?
Marta, you had another statement you wanted to make before we pass it off to Marsha for a question and answer.
Thank you. And Nicole just said a lot of it. The other piece is going back to what Marsha was saying, with the stolen, and then just how about pinning each other, who's worthy or whatever. I think it's really important also for us all here on these squares to recognize how much of the systems and the white supremacy culture traits we had to ingest in order to be in the positions that we're in. And when we've been the gatekeepers, and when we've held system in places, and when we have been the yucks, right? And then when we're able to be free, like we were talking about in the community and stuff, then we get to learn all the other pieces on how to really heal and how to really be in right relationship. And I am just grateful that we together have been able to have very courageous conversations on what we've modeled, where we have been bamboozled, if you would, and where we have been tricked, and where, when power is made invisible, racism thrives, and how all of us have been impacted by that. And us being willing to be on the other side of this has gotten us to where we are able to make the positive changes to move this in a direction that is positive for all of us, having the real conversations and not having to be like, I wish I could have told her that, but I didn't, or whatever, that we're able to say the things and still know that we can be in right relationship and still change things that are not serving us, especially when they're really harming and causing every single one of us to stay sick. And now we're able to be like, oh no, we're not going to be bamboozled anymore, because we are together. And we're going to move this work forward together, and they cannot trick us anymore, because we know where we're going and we know where we came from.
Can I say something before we move into the Q&A? Because I just had a thought, a little revelation. So first of all, fairness is like beauty. It's in the eyes of the beholder. We have to dictate what fairness is, because the reality is most funders, whether it's government, whether it's philanthropy, they have a bucket of money. They fund a lot of organizations, and the money is just like a drop in the ground, a drop in the bucket. It's just like a seed. It drives a lot of small organizations into mere chaos, because you have to find the matching grant in order to support the person who has to continuously write the grants, or it's a one-time infusion of money that requires capacity, right, in order to run the program, because somebody has to go out and do whatever to keep this thing going to find multi-year funding. So a lot of times the one dump of money to a lot of people, it causes more harm for organizations. But the Brilliance Award to me is kind of like, the Bible talks about that seed that falls on ground, and sometimes it gets plucked up, it falls on hard ground, it runs into hard circumstances, or it's not really able to take root because it's not enough, or you don't have enough hands to actually make it work. But brilliance to me is like a thing that is seeded. It has the ability and the support, financial support from Zedek, in order for it to kind of bud and flourish. So would you rather seed a whole bunch or cause, a few people to flourish and then have that ripple effect?
I
I love
love
all the, yeah, I know, all the seeds and the brilliance, and also
this. Yes.
I'm seeing people have some revelations while they're on the panel. I Part of the reason why I love these conversations. We'd love to invite y'all into who are in the audience into the conversation. So you can either put a question in the chat or use the raise your hand function. You do that because there should be icons on the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen. Click reactions and then click raise hand, and we'll get a question from you that way. While folks are working and trying to figure out what kind of question they'd like to ask, a comment. One of the things that were emerging for me as y'all were talking about learning to say no and the boundaries is one of the things that we have to name is that y'all are not just working a lot because you're workaholics, right? Which you may be, but doesn't the system also the system, right, puts us in this workaholism mode? And I'll say specifically because y'all identify as women of color, that there's also like this cultural expectation on women of color to be the ones who are, the cultural expectation, I don't have a better word for it, is that we're the domestic workers of our communities, right? That folks really usually look at women of color and say, hey, you fix this. You take on the labor of doing this work. And so there's, while it may be, can you guys speak a little bit to not just the expectations that are coming from you internally that make you push and continue to do this work, but are you also experiencing some expectations from society, from communities, assuming that you're the ones who should be taking on all of the work?
I mean, there's no secret, or it's not surprising that when you look at community, most of the people who are like the pillars are Black and brown women, right? Be it making sure the youth have certain programming and support, from making sure there's food at the events and all the things, or reminding folks that this meeting is coming up, or are holding down those 11 board positions. So I think it's a reflection of our community too. And not only are Black and brown women, there's just this expectation to show up and support community. There's also the expectations to also hold down a home, right? So like, you've had your 14-hour day, you also got to go home and clean and cook and make sure homework was done and all the things. And so I just think there's just like patriarchy, right, and misogyny, which can be like a whole nother like 4-hour conversation of the expectations, right? There's a reason as to why when we see a father washing dishes, the world is praising him. But when we see a mother doing that same thing, it's just like, cool, that's your role, right? So I think there's just like that shows up a lot, which again, the patriarchy and misogyny, even amongst community work, is very real.
Ooh, thank you for that question, Marsha, and Nicole. Thank you so much for saying that. I also believe, Marsha, that for me, working in the school system, right, and seeing who volunteers, right, or like, the stay-at-home moms for PTO, and then Libby knows because we're not gonna call her, she's the only woman of color in PTO in the school system, because right. And yet for the narrative is like, well, the Black women don't show up to the carnival and to do the things and to do the volunteering, right? And so I hope that as people are listening here, does anyone volunteer more than the volunteering that you're hearing here that you don't get paid for? It just looks different. It's just not recognized, and it doesn't have that name, and it doesn't look like the carnival and the something in whatever the organization is, right? The Women's League and not to call anyone out, but we just gotta recognize, because the narrative is that we don't show up for PTO, we don't care, that we don't whatever the narrative is. And yet if you don't know the truth and you don't hear the pieces of like, I would swap you in 5 minutes to go be in the PTO if you want to do what you just heard here on the panel list here to do. I will swap you in 13 seconds, right? And that is important for us to know, because we do that with the youth as well, right? Like who are the kids that went to volunteer, but then we don't recognize that there are Black and Latino students that are working already to support families and stuff. So what does that volunteering look like, right? So that's another component that I want all of us on the panel, but then all of the people present to really have in mind too, that when you don't understand how some of us have a lived experience because of how we live on this planet, that it doesn't mean that it's wrong or that we're not doing it. It just looks really different. And would you be willing to swap it? Like Jane Elliott says, you know how Black and brown people are treated in this country. Would you be willing to swap with each of the folks? And no one answered. And she said, I don't think you understood the assignment, right? Because we know.
Thank you, Marta. I do want to recognize that there's a question in the chat. Were you going there, Marsha?
I was.
I'm sorry.
No, totally fine. So the question that's emerging in the chat is, how can we become more transformative, with our nonprofits so the impact of their work is more forceful? I'm referring to our more formal, structured nonprofits rather than neighborhood grassroots groups. I imagine there's a lot to say on this one. So who wants to take it off?
I'm gonna jump in here. I think, you have to clean up your own house before you try to tell other people how to clean up theirs. And I think that there's this thing of like, especially when 2020 hit, we saw a lot of organizations put out these beautiful statements, but then the group chat from their Black and brown employees was very different. And so I think that, white supremacy teaches us that we have to be urgent. And I think there's an opportunity for nonprofits to slow down and say, we actually can't put out any more statements until we're taking care of the people who work here. And your work is not going to be transformative with high turnover, with staff that are burnt out. And I think there's an opportunity for people to say, let's reevaluate how much we pay people. Let's have a real conversation about class. Can the people who work here actually pay their bills? How many people who work here have to rely on government assistance, right? And so if we have nonprofits that are like, we want to care about the community, but aren't caring about the people that work there, I feel like HR is like the first step, not necessarily community engagement, not necessarily the beautiful statement. So I always say, what are your HR policies and your budgets that are like, I think your HR policies and your budgets say way more about you than your community engagement and your really beautiful statements and graphics that are put out.
And Nicole, I'm going to add to that, put the money where the mouth is. Put the money where the statements are. Put the money where your mouth is. To me, that's the line. Put the money where your mouth is.
Anyone else on the panel want to add? Okay. I wanted to highlight what Nicole was saying in part because, granted, we're a funder, right? So we're definitely not in the same position of having to fundraise. And yet, especially because Asheville is a city, but a very small city, that most of us who are running these nonprofits, if you're employing Black and brown or queer and trans folks, you're employing folks who are also trying to live in this city as well. And so you're employing folks who then end up going to other nonprofits to then get support, right? Who are then using like the nonprofit system and the government system to help supplement the pay that you're giving them. So as much as possible, one of the things that Zedek we like to engage in funder advocacy to help convince other funders to lean into trust-based philanthropy, but also get other funders to lean into general operating support. So if you're a nonprofit leader who needs us to maybe use some of our clout at a table to push a conversation, please let us know, because I really want to encourage nonprofit folks, especially if you're based in Asheville and the living wage, according to Just Economics, just increased, is increase your budgets to accommodate that living wage when you put in that grant application. Do not put in the grant application and ask for the amount of money that you received the last year. That grant request should go in asking for an amount of money that's a living wage in this city in particular. And we would love to kind of flank you in terms of advocating with the funders that you have, that they should be giving you either increasing their budget or increasing their grant or helping you advocate with other funders to get the funds that you need to make sure that people are making a living wage at your institution. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Libby, any parting words as we try to wrap up our time today?
I'd love to share a poem with y'all if you're willing to listen. And it's not some new transformational poem. It's something you all have heard before. And I was really surprised when Marta started to chime in on freedom, because that's what struck me and why I chose this particular poem today. And it is Caged Bird by Maya Angelou. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends and dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The cage bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free birds think of another breeze, and the trade wind soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a cage bird stands on the graves of dreams. His shadow shouts out a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The cage bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom. I chose this particular poem because I think one of the things that, if you didn't catch that in what you've heard today, is that we are, as funders in Zedek, seeking to offer opportunities for people to grasp freedom. And whether we like it or not, economics in this day and time supports folks being able to be free and being able to create for themselves and their families what has been inherently denied them.
Thank you, Libby, for bringing in that reminder. We want to support the leaders in our communities to be free, so they can help the rest of our community be free. We're asking you to think about the ways in which we heal the ones who heal in our community. So just like with every other webinar, we're going to play a little music to play you out. We thank you so much for being here, and we invite you to join us at the next webinar or catch the recording.